Today is Saturday, December 5th, 2015. This is our little miniature Rohatsu session. Only a day and a half, really. And yet, in it, we recognize, touch base with, and work to actualize in our own lives the great awakening of the Buddha, which is where Zen practice begins. The lineage of all Zen teachers originates with Shakyamuni Buddha. And before we start, just to say, in our time now, to see the perversion of mind, the perversion of the purposes of religion being played out all around us, we have so much to be grateful for, to realize that religion has nothing to do with those things. It's really about recognizing our own nature, not pointing to a book, not pointing to a leader, recognizing our own nature and allowing the wisdom and compassion that are our nature to function. This is the whole point. Anyone who says differently has no understanding of what religion is about. And it's a terrible shame, great sorrow that we're all enmeshed in these days. So it's particularly wonderful this year, 2015, to be able to acknowledge the great awakening of the Buddha, which underlies everything that we do in Zen to help ourselves and others walk a path of wisdom and compassion. So it begins with the Buddha's realization of original Buddhahood, and we'll take a look at that in this morning's teisho, with the story of the Buddha's enlightenment and a bit of a commentary on it. When the prince of the Shakya clan, Siddhartha Gautama, was 29 years old, he saw an old man, a sick man, a dead man, and last of all, a solitary, homeless truth seeker. He took it in, aging, sickness, death, and realized that no one, no matter how privileged, escapes. He took off his jewels, left the protective walls of his palace, shaved his beard, cut his long hair, crossed the river boundary of his father's kingdom, entered the lonely forests and mountains, and never looked back. He sought out the two most widely respected religious teachers of his time, and mastering their methods, gained steadiness and calm. Yet he knew he was still not free from birth, old age, sickness, and death. So he moved on to yet more isolated places and more drastic practices. He went to deep forests and graveyards and took up the path of severe austerities, attempting to gain liberation by willfully harming the body. He limited his eating of food until he was surviving on 1,000, then 100, then 10, and then at last just one sesame seed a day. His flesh and muscles withered, his eyes sank into their sockets, his hair rotted and fell out, his ribs, bony sockets, joints, skull, and bones stood out like the wreck of a ship revealed by the tide. After 6 years of such effort, he was exhausted at the point of death, more a skeleton wound with sinews and veins than a living man. Having failed in his quest, he would die with his life purpose unfulfilled. The bitterness of that moment could have no relief. At the dead-end limit of the ascetic path, in this moment of deepest despair, there flashed into his mind the memory of a festival day from deep in his childhood. He'd been seated under a rose apple tree then, watching his father, the nobles and peasants, all plowing the earth together. He saw the earth breaking open in even wave-like furrows, the heat shimmering up off the freshly opened soil, shining on the sweat-slicked brows and straining bodies of men and oxen alike, the sun flashing off the gilded traces and horns of the royal oxen. He heard the plodding rhythm of hooves and cowbells rolling in a solemn sea-like way beneath the shrill shouts of the men and the whirring cries of the birds as they dove to peck at and devour the billowing hordes of insects, blind glistening grubs, cut worms, and broken bodies of mice, which men, oxen, and plows left in their wake. Child though he was, the terribly obvious laboring, devouring, suffering, and dying, which went on beneath the surface tinseling of all his own easy, mostly festival days, had broken in upon him then, and weighed heavily on his mind. Seated alone beneath the rose-apple tree, reflecting deeply on the scene before him, self-centeredness had fallen away, and he'd entered profound samadhi. Now at the brink of death, this memory returned, filling him with new energy and purpose. If he'd glimpsed the way when just a child, well fed and clothed, then attaining enlightenment, he now saw, could not depend on punishing the body. As if in response, Sujata, a maiden from a neighboring village, came and offered him, this dying holy man, a bowl of milk rice. He accepted her life-saving meal, and his 5 ascetic disciples, convinced that the ex-prince had simply abandoned his quest for truth by eating, walked away and left him. He ate in silence. When he finished, somehow he was strong enough to stand. Leaning on his staff, he slowly made his way to the nearby Naranjana River, where he bathed away 6 years of accumulated filth. Climbing onto the shore, he announced, "If this is indeed the day of my supreme enlightenment, may my bowl float upstream." He cast his empty bowl onto the water, and it forged against the current to the whirlpool of Kala Nagaraja, the Black Snake King, the Naga King, where it whirled down into the jeweled chambers of the Naga King's palace. It came to rest against an endless row of identical bowls. Clink. Hearing that little sound, the Naga King raised his ancient head. "Yesterday a Buddha arose," he proclaimed. "Today there is another. Swaha, awake, rejoice." And he began to chant his chants in praise of the Bodhisattva's victory. The Bodhisattva, Siddhartha Gautama, strode towards the Bodhi tree. There, in the soft light of the late afternoon, he met a poor grass cutter, who offered him 8 bundles of grass to serve as his sitting mat. The future Buddha spread the grass at the base of the tree, seated himself in the lotus posture, and with resolve deeply rooted, like a mountain, announced, "Though only my skin, sinews, and bones remain, and my blood and flesh dry up and wither away, I will not leave this spot until I have attained full enlightenment." And he pressed forward again in deepening zazen. Then fearsome and foul, as well as seductive and pleasant visions arose around him. All the forces of life's clinging to states of joy, comfort, and ease came swaying to him in the form of 3 women, the 3 beautiful daughters of Mara, the tempter. They danced before him, offering exquisite pleasure, unceasing comfort, endless rest, while life's terrors, fears of death and suffering, of hell's horrors, pain, ugliness, the unknown, mobbed him, shrieking of torment, deformity, and all manner of terrible and disgusting experience should he persist. Mara's army descended, horse-headed, 10-eyed, tiger-faced, many-armed, with faces in their chests, with sharp yellow teeth and blood-dripping mouths, with spiders for hands hissing with adders' tongues. On they came, heaving stones, knives, spears, hurling flaming discs, mud and filth. Shrieking madly, they whirled upon him like a flock of hunger-maddened crows, striving to peck and tear some slight scraps of nourishment from a huge stone. They could not. At last, Mara the tempter approached, assuming the voice of Gautama's own innerness. The habit voice of his own thoughts began questioning the Buddha. Are you sure you are the one? Sure you have this Buddha nature? Sure you are worthy of coming to supreme enlightenment today? Right now? Think of it. Supreme enlightenment. Supreme enlightenment. But the future Buddha only touched the earth with his right hand and asked the earth to witness for him. And the earth replied with 100, 1,000, 100,000 voices. The voices of furrows and graves, voices of youth and age, of man, woman, and child, the unheeded cries of beasts, the quick unknown silvery language of fish, the sweet twinings of plants, and the warm gray crumblings of stone. For all were one voice thundering, "He is worthy." There is not one spot on this globe where he's not already offered himself totally, selflessly through endless lifetimes to the attainment of enlightenment and the welfare of all living beings. Mara vanished. His army dropped their weapons and fled. His daughters, prostrating, asked forgiveness, and his war elephant, called Mountain Girded, the lumbering vehicle of ego's prideful strength, came crashing to the ground, and it too was gone. Alone beneath the Bodhi tree, the future Buddha pressed on, arousing deeper and deeper practice without cease, transcending old limitations, until with the dawn, his mind rose clear and radiant and obvious as the daybreak. And when he glanced at the morning star, he found enlightenment itself crying out, "Wonder of wonders." Intrinsically, all living beings are Buddhas, endowed with wisdom and virtue. At this moment, I and all beings together have attained the way. He was 35 years of age and had broken through to what others as yet only half dreamed. The path had been reopened. The Dharma was again accessible to the efforts of humans and devas. In the steadily rising morning light, a fully realized Buddha now sat beneath the suddenly blossoming tree. So, let's take a look at this in light of our own lives and our own practice. Though it's a wonderful incident, it becomes dead if we simply say, "Oh, that's a wonderful thing that happened long ago." At some point, we all come face to face with the realities of sickness, aging, and death. At some point, we may also come to accept that the Buddha wasn't a fool or a liar when he said, "Wonder of wonders." All beings are Buddhas, endowed with wisdom and virtue. Only delusion prevents us from seeing it. At some point, we may realize that that truth includes us, all beings, is us. At that point, we can get serious about practice and do whatever is necessary to give it room, right within the busy demands of our life. Long ago, I was on a panel with several noted children's book authors. A very successful woman author was asked how she found time to write. She said that when her children were young, she would point to the door of the room she wrote in and say, "Unless blood flows under the door, I won't open it for the next hour while I'm in there writing." I found that helpful advice for writing and for Zen practice. At some point, we too give ourselves permission to periodically shut the door on life's demands so we can claim our space on a mat, sit beneath our Bodhi tree, and do the work of practice realization in this very life, just as we are. Like the Buddha, we find that we can't wait around till we're handed the time and space to do it. Tomorrow is the day that never comes. We find that we must do it now. Faith in the reality of the Buddha's enlightenment experience, our knowledge of impermanence, our trust in Zen tradition, and the resolve to go the distance are our allies. Zen practice is not convenient. Yet in the face of the realities of sickness, aging, and death, it is vital. Zen is the Buddha path of awakening. It is not simply a matter of sitting still and being calm. Nor, if we're serious, can it be a hobby, something to do when we have time left over from our real tasks. Instead, we choose again and again to not only make room for it, but to let it settle at the core of our life. The Buddhist story is our inspiration, which doesn't mean we leave our families or work to get enlightened. Maybe that's what he had to do, given his times, culture, karma, and opportunities. But 2,500 years after he first opened the way, we can now find the path as dedicated lay practitioners. Sure, it takes effort, decision, and dedication. But what we get out of practice is proportionate to what we put in. Enlightenment or intimacy is both the goal as well as the beating heart of Zen Buddhism. But the desire to go beyond limits is universal. James Stephens writes in Irish fairy tales, the man who keeps putting one foot in front of the other, let's make it gender neutral. The person who keeps putting one foot in front of the other will leave their home behind and come at last to the sea and the end of the world. Hakuin Zenji in Japan 150 years or so earlier said if someone wanted to know the taste of seawater, even if they lived far inland, if they set out for the ocean, kept going, and didn't turn back or stop, in time they'd reach the sea and easily know the taste of the water for themselves. He was talking about practice, of course, practice realization. The Buddha, as the Jatakas show, kept going too, onward. Zen tradition proclaims one step, one breath, one koan after another. Wherever we are, whatever we may have realized or not realized, we too can commit ourselves to keep going. The essence, as has been said of genius, is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. We do the work. Then we keep doing the work. One aha moment will not suffice. Many have fallen there thinking, okay, I've got it, I'm done. Now I'll just live my life. As Zen tradition says, how many skulls litter that ground? Kensho, touching the ground of mind, is not the end of the road. Touching the ground is a beginning, like opening a door, looking down and saying, oh, here's the ground. Then we can walk through the door and continue our journey knowing that the ground is under our feet. In a number of Jatakas, the Bodhisattva sees into the reality of selflessness, the identity of form and emptiness, relative and absolute, and realizes true nature. These are milestone moments, but not full realization. Jataka tradition says regardless of where he was born, whatever form he was born into, whatever challenging life issue he faced, he always chose to go further, over the next hill, beyond the next river, through the next dark forest. Not ignoring a problem, but working with it. He actualized the way. Onward, further was his nature, as it is our own. It is why the Tao is called the way, or the path. Practice realization is not static, but a road that continues endlessly. As a Japanese saying puts it, even Shakyamuni is only halfway there. a stunning pointer to just how endless endlessness might be. Zen reveres the Buddha's enlightenment because it shows our own potential even as it reveals the work, persistence, perseverance, dedication that underlies all milestone experiences. There are pointers to practice throughout the classical narrative. The Buddha has his Christ on the cross moment when he discovers that willful asceticism has not clarified a thing, but only left him bereft in a dark and empty place. And though the ex-prince sat and sat, in the end, it wasn't enough. There was a trigger to his deepest experience. Realization didn't simply come from looking within. It could have been a word, a sound, anything really, for his mind was ripe. What happened is that he glanced up after a long night of focused zazen, and there was the morning star. Ah. Then a morning star sat on 8 bundles of grass beneath the Bodhi tree. Gone, gone, entirely gone, as the Prajna Paramita Hridaya Heart of Perfect Wisdom says. No one seeing is real seeing. No one sitting is real sitting. Just star. Only star. The Buddha to be didn't just sit beneath the Bodhi tree either. He responded. When Mara challenged him, he didn't get caught up in it, but he didn't ignore it. When situations arise in our lives, we can't just go and sit until they're gone. There is a time to act. It need not be a big deal. In fact, it would be wise to not make it a big deal. The Buddha touched the earth and asked the earth to witness for him. With that simple act and request, Mara's world was crushed. The Buddha to be didn't try to out-argue Mara. He made one gesture and one request, and it was enough. And there's honest truth, too, in the story's point that the final obstacle, even for the Buddha, was the last vestiges of self-doubt. In a sense, self-doubt is what all obstacles come down to. Yet what is beyond both self-doubt and self-confidence? Some people, when passed on an initial koan, can fall into, that's it, really? As old habits of mind return. The voice of Mara is ancient and universal. Yet it need not be an obstacle. It's another Dharma gate we vow to wake to. I know a Roshi who, after being passed long ago on his initial koan, put himself back on Mu for another 3 years before accepting what he already had. Many Zen teachers, when first sanctioned, may go through several years of feeling like frauds while they are teaching and guiding others well. We're all in the same boat, all members of the same one nose, two eye hole human society. The Buddha was no different. In the last moments before his full and perfect realization of the way, Anuttara, Samyak, Sambodhi, perfect complete enlightenment, he may have faced for the last time our most ancient and persistent limitation, self-doubt. While only legendary, it rings true. There's a lovely touch of myth, too, when Kala Nagaraja, the Naga king, raises his ancient head and linear time falls away. For an instant, we are in the inconceivability of timelessness. The bowl forging upstream against the current reminds us that we, too, must go against the flow of thoughts, concepts, and ideas. The little clink of bowl against bowl tells its own story, dramatizing the truth that through the endlessness of time, many had already gained full awakening to Buddhahood. The story of the Buddha's enlightenment is part of the classical canon, and at the same time, is a demonstration of the heart of our practice and our issues now. For Buddhist tradition says that we all have the nature of Buddha, have exactly the same vast, empty nature of creative potential as Shakyamuni and all previous and future Buddhas. From the first, we are each fully and equally endowed with wisdom and compassion. and because it is already who we are if we practice. If we make the effort, then we too can, to one degree or another, awaken to our own original mind. Enlightenment is not a thing we get. If anything, it comes from losing, not gaining. Losing what we cling to, losing all that ancient interior self-centered stuff that cuts us off from wind, rain, sun, moon, stars, trees, animals, people. With that great and wonderful loss, we find our missing intimacy with everything. Enlightenment is the name given to our being able to attest to intimacy with sun, moon, stars, wind, rain, snow, clouds, trash, bugs, cats, rivers, mountains, trees. We do not gain it because it has never been lost. Like the ground, it has always been here. We just didn't have the steadiness to see. And with that inability to recognize what is truly so, came a host of greater and lesser problems, ranging from simple dissatisfaction to full-blown anguish, not to mention ordinary greed, hatred, and ignorance. Of course, it's not that I become intimate with everything. Rather, the so-called 10,000 things step in and replace me, are me. Intimacy is that intimate. Zen asks, if we are this enlightened nature, then where is it? Why don't we know it? Eihei Dogen in 13th century Japan agonized over this question until through ongoing zazen it was resolved. We too bore into our version of such questions like a thirsty person drilling for water. A sonar survey, the life of the Buddha, the Jatakas, Zen teaching show that water is there. We have a map, not blind belief. Our map shows that all the water we will ever need is already beneath our feet. So we keep at it. We sit. We go to Doksan, hear teisho. We examine precepts, experience the breath, count the breath, just sit, or endlessly return to koan point after koan point again and again. The Buddha, the ex-prince, came to his final touching the earth moment after lifetimes of keeping at it, after many insights, many openings. For some people, too, it's not until years into their practice, after initial milestones and glimpses, that the gate really opens and they personally know for sure. The Buddha's enlightenment, though tradition says, was unique, for it was complete. Every level of character and mind fully realized. And it was so because of all the countless lifetimes of work that preceded it. In substance, every kensho, the small kind we're likely to realize, and the Buddha's great enlightenment are the same. But in content, they are vastly different. Buddhist mythos says that in this world age, no one experienced more deeply than Shakyamuni, because no one had worked so hard to prepare for it. He touched not only the ground, but the bottomless bottom and the soaring heights. Comparing our practice realization to his would be like comparing the finger painting of a kindergartner to a work by Rembrandt or Picasso. The substance is the same, both are paintings, but the degree of conscious realization is vastly different. Yet we all must begin somewhere, and for the kindergartner, that finger painting can be just as meaningful as Rembrandt's work was to him. The Buddha's story, his home leaving and forest path exertions, his abandonment by his ascetic disciples, and his solitary face-off with Mara, the primordial force of his and our innate ignorance, completes his long Jataka path. Touching the earth, he gets up and walks on, transcending the final temptation to just sit at ease in complete enjoyment of freedom, wisdom, and peace. Instead, he devotes the next 50 years of his life to walking the dusty roads, teaching those who, while in reality as complete and whole as he, don't yet know it. He goes back into the chaos of the 10,000 things, at peace with it all, with it all. How? Case 37, Shoyoroku, Book of Serenity. Kuei-shan, it's karmic consciousness. Kuei-shan asked Yang-shan, suppose a man asks you, how about one who says all sentient beings are in a disorderly karmic consciousness and have no base to rely upon? How would you treat him? Yang-shan said, if a man appears, I call to him. When he turns his head, instantly I say, what is that? I wait while he hesitates, and then I say to him, there is not only disorderly karmic consciousness, but there is no base to rely upon. Kuei-shan said, oh, good. Not only is there the mess of things, but there is nothing to rely on. What is that nothing? Just prior to the moment of enlightenment after the Buddha to be's 6 years of exhaustive effort and endless kalpas of jataka practice exertions, going the limit, trying and trying with all he had, drawing on the power of all his countless previous efforts, failures and triumphs, Mara, the tempter or distractor, the inner voice of ego, takes off his masks and appears nakedly. He or she or it's worried that Siddhartha may actually escape the subtlest nets of self-centeredness and awake fully to innate Buddhahood. Mara makes a last-ditch effort to turn the once sheltered but now deeply determined ex-prince from the goal and pulls out his ace in the hole, self-doubt. What? I have this true nature? It is me? And I can realize it? Really? This doubt convinces us to believe in a forever separate, winning, losing, solitary, interior self. It is a root belief, gluing us to the provisionally real. Mara confronts the Buddha to be and asks, how could you, a sheltered ex-prince, be worthy of the supreme goal of complete and perfect enlightenment? Better men and women than you have aimed for it and failed. You're young and a beginner. Give yourself time to work at it. But now, no way, back off, take it slow. It's a reasonable request and reasonable advice. Reasonable as all get out. Devilishly reasonable. Take it easy. Be careful. Go slow and steady. Prepare. Reduce ego concerns. Don't be hasty. At this crucial juncture, with worlds hanging in the balance, Siddhartha doesn't waste time arguing with his own predilection towards self-centeredness or egotism. He doesn't try to put together a reasonable counter-argument. To enter the fray is to have already lost. Ready, not ready, a self that gains, a self that loses, a self that has it, a self that doesn't have it. He doesn't get sucked into Mara's metaphor at all. Instead, seeing the joke, he probably smiled. Maybe he allowed himself the luxury of shaking his head in pity for poor old Mara. Then he reached down and touched the earth and let the earth witness for him. And the earth replied with its thousands of interwoven voices speaking as one. Interbeing, to use Thich Nhat Hanh's lovely term, speaks up. Mara is overwhelmed and thoroughly defeated. His last effort to tempt the Buddha to be to falter and cling to a limited view of me in here and everything and everyone else out there is crushed. This is the Zen moment in this story, a moment of direct pointing, not clinging to words at all. The humble, right here, right now, ever-present ground speaks, confirming worth beyond measure. Progressive, one step after another, practice bows before right here, right now mind. Touching the earth is touching the ground, the clay, the foundation of who and what we are. Vast emptiness filled with endless possibilities like stars. dust we are made. Adam, first man, gets his name from Adama, Hebrew for earth. Human is from the Latin humanus, groundling. Touching the ground is touching the ground of being us. Sesshin means to touch the mind, the ground of being. We sit for days and get grounded, accepting ourselves, including past errors and efforts. We let our own Jataka past, our own births and lives, including those in this lifetime, confirm us. All have been our route to this present moment. Jataka tales are the record of the Buddha's practice history. It is a long history, said to go back eons, world ages, big bangs. We too, according to Buddhist tradition, have our own history. We easily accept the one that begins in childhood. Perhaps we can also accept that, as with the Buddha, our history might extend back even further. Where does the path of causation that unfolds as each plant, bug, animal, bird, us begin? Our interest in music or literature, in cooking or Zen, does it come from our genes, psychology, or past lifetimes? Is there a difference? Past lives don't mean that once I was that and now I'm this, and so on. No entity is retained and reformed, no permanent I reborn, but like waves on the sea, the energy of one set of interactions gives rise to the next. The ground we walk on is full of microbes, germs, worms, bugs. Mind ground is full of doubts, fears, pride, worries, regrets. Neither the ground nor mind are sanitized. Yet, when we were children, we could stretch out fearlessly on the ground, could roll on it, lie on it, gaze up at clouds, sky, birds. We could pick up dirt, rub it into our jeans and hands and hair, and come home shining. When did we become afraid to touch the earth? When did we start to think we were too good for it, that it was not just our support, but beneath us? When we were young, we explored our minds effortlessly, fearlessly experimenting with sound, shapes, color, movement, emotions, health, sickness, ideas, as well as internal narratives and voices. When did we learn to fear our own nature? The moment of final challenge, the Buddha touched the earth. He didn't reach for the sky or beg for help from above. He didn't try to win the debate and out-argue the distractor. He simply touched the always present, selfless ground and asked the earth to witness. The earth, witness to all the Jatakas, responds. Her response confirms him and overwhelms doubt. It's not just ancient history, it's our story too. This moment is part of the ongoing Jataka series of the unfully realized Buddhas we each are. Essential nature, mind itself, the ground beneath us, is always here. Past lives, past thoughts, decisions, and events lead to the present one in which we sit, walk, stand, speak, eat, work, worry, create, pick our noses. Come day's end, we say good night and lie down on the ground of our nature, the ground we practice from, have always been standing on, whether we know it or not. It is always ready to testify for us. Our fundamental vow as human beings is to know ourselves. This is why we practice. Zen Master Dogen wrote out the central realization of our path in a few well-chosen words. When the self advances to become one with the 10,000 things, it is called delusion. When the 10,000 things advance and confirm the self, it is called enlightenment. The 10,000 things are birds, bugs, clouds, mountains, rivers, people, animals, traffic sounds, cell phones, raindrops, pebbles, clumps of earth, bright morning stars. ordinary things confirm us, tell us, indeed make us, who we are every day. There is no barrier between us and a single thing, not as much as a single hair or speck of dust. That enlightenment is intimacy is not cleverness or serendipity. It is simply the way of things. Touching the earth is always possible. Intimacy is always possible because the ground is never far away. In the Shobogenzo chapter titled Mind Itself is Buddha, Dogen writes that one instant is mind itself is Buddha. Shakyamuni Buddha, says Dogen, is mind itself is Buddha. He adds that if you realize this mind, there is not an inch of ground left on earth, no ground beneath us, no sky above. Everything, all concepts of this or that totally gone. It is that intimate. What is that like? Let's turn to our good friend of the West, William Blake, for closing words. He says it's simply to see a world in a grain of sand, a heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand, eternity in an hour. Whenever and wherever we touch such ground, east or west, we are home. We'll stop here and recite our vows for all.